The mansion smelled of champagne and expensive perfume. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across marble floors, while servers in crisp uniforms moved through crowds of guests who wore jewelry worth more than most people earned in a year. Fiona Grant carried a silver tray of champagne flutes, her uniform pressed and plain, designed to make her invisible. That was exactly what she needed. She had worked at the Mercer estate for 3 months now, cleaning rooms and serving meals, watching and documenting everything. The other staff thought she was quiet, maybe too serious for someone scrubbing toilets and dusting furniture. They did not know she held a master's degree in forensic accounting. They did not know she had spent the last 5 years tracking corporate fraud through labyrinthine financial systems. And they certainly did not know why she was really here. The gala was in full swing. Patrick Mercer, the silver-haired founder of Mercer Tech, stood near the grand staircase, accepting congratulations on the company's recent acquisition deals. His son Julian moved through the crowd with the ease of someone born into wealth, his dark suit tailored perfectly, his handshake firm and practiced. At 35, Julian ran the company as CEO, while his father supposedly enjoyed semi-retirement. Fiona knew better. Patrick Mercer had not loosened his grip on anything, least of all the empire he had built. Veronica Chase clung to Julian's arm, her platinum hair styled in waves that must have taken hours. She laughed at something a guest said, her hand resting possessively on Julian's chest. They had been engaged for 8 months. The wedding was perpetually being planned but never quite scheduled. Fiona found that detail interesting, though she had not yet determined why it mattered. A glass shattered somewhere near the hallway leading to Julian's private office. Fiona moved toward the sound automatically, her training overriding the instinct to let someone else handle it. The noise of the party faded as she walked down the corridor, her shoes silent on the Persian runner. She knelt beside the broken crystal, already pulling cleaning supplies from the small kit she carried. That was when she heard the voices. The office door was not fully closed. Through the gap, she could see Patrick Mercer standing beside his desk and across from him, a man she had seen in financial reports, but never in person. Richard Sutton, an investor whose name appeared in dozens of transactions that made no sense, that created patterns where there should have been none. "The timeline moves up," Patrick said, his voice low but clear. "Julian is getting restless about the Singapore deal. We need the transfers completed before he starts asking the wrong questions." "I thought you said he trusted you." Sutton's tone carried skepticism. "He does, but he is not stupid. Another 2 months and we finalize everything. The acquisition paperwork goes through during the honeymoon. By the time he realizes what he signed, control will be irreversible." Fiona's hands stilled on the broken glass. She had suspected financial manipulation, had found threads of evidence in server logs and backup files that should have been deleted, but hearing it confirmed, hearing Patrick Mercer casually discuss defrauding his own son, sent ice through her chest. She should have left, should have retreated silently and documented what she heard. Instead, she stayed frozen, listening as they discussed transfer protocols and shell companies, as they laughed about how easy it had been to build this system right under Julian's nose. The door opened fully. Julian stood in the doorway, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to confusion, as he took in the scene. Fiona on her knees beside broken glass, the office door ajar, his father and Sutton standing too close together, their conversation cutting off too abruptly. "What are you doing here?" Julian's question was directed at her, his voice sharp. Fiona stood slowly, carefully setting aside the cleaning cloth. "A glass broke. I was cleaning it." "By my office?" His eyes narrowed. "This hallway was closed for the evening. I heard the noise. I did not realize it was restricted." Patrick emerged from the office, his genial host expression sliding back into place. "Julian, is there a problem? I found the help lurking outside your door." Julian gestured toward Fiona with barely concealed irritation. "During a private conversation. I was not lurking, I was cleaning." Fiona kept her voice even, professional. She had been in worse situations. She knew how to de-escalate, but Julian was not interested in de-escalation. He had been working 18-hour days, had been under pressure from investors and board members, and now he had found a domestic employee apparently eavesdropping during one of the most important events of the quarter. His frustration found an easy target. "How long were you standing there?" "Long enough to clean up broken glass." "That is not an answer." Fiona met his gaze. His eyes were grey-blue, the color of storm clouds, and right now they were cold. She had watched him for 3 months, had analyzed his management style and decision-making patterns. He was intelligent and driven, genuinely passionate about the technology his company developed. He was also completely blind to what his father was doing. "I will finish cleaning and return to the kitchen," she said. "You will finish packing your things." Julian's voice carried across the hallway, loud enough that several guests had turned to look. "You are fired." The words hung in the air. Patrick made a show of placing a calming hand on his son's shoulder. "Julian, surely that is extreme. The girl made a mistake." She was listening to a private conversation. "That is not a mistake. That is a violation of trust." He turned back to Fiona. "Get your belongings and leave. You will receive 2 weeks' pay. Consider it generous." Fiona felt dozens of eyes on her. The other servers had stopped moving. Guests whispered behind their champagne flutes. This was exactly the kind of attention she could not afford, the kind of scene that would end her investigation before it was complete. But there was no way to argue without making things worse, no way to defend herself without revealing too much. She walked back toward the kitchen, past the staring faces, her mind racing through contingency plans. 3 months of work, 3 months of access to the house, to the filing systems, to the patterns of movement and security protocols. All of it about to disappear because Julian Mercer had a temper and she had been careless. In the small room off the kitchen where staff kept their personal items, Fiona retrieved her bag. Her hands were steady as she packed the few belongings she kept here. She had learned a long time ago not to let emotion interfere with thinking. Panic was useless. She needed to assess her options, determine what information she had already secured, what gaps remained in the evidence. The door opened. Julian stood in the doorway, his expression still hard. "I want to make sure you are actually leaving." "I am." "Good." He crossed his arms. "I do not tolerate spying. Whatever you heard, whatever you think you heard, it is none of your concern." Fiona zipped her bag closed. She should walk out, should leave quietly and find another way to complete the investigation. That was the smart move, the professional move. But she thought of the woman who had hired her. Eleanor Mercer had died a year ago, her final months consumed by an illness that left her frail and confused. In her lucid moments, she had tried to warn her son about financial irregularities, about patterns that did not make sense. Julian had dismissed her concerns as side effects of medication, as a sick woman's paranoid delusions. Eleanor had died knowing her son did not believe her, knowing her husband was stealing from the company she had helped build. Fiona reached the doorway where Julian stood. She could see the party continuing beyond him, Patrick laughing with investors, Veronica scanning the crowd for her fiancé. She could see the wealth and the power and the absolute certainty that they were untouchable. She stopped beside Julian and spoke quietly, her voice meant only for him. "Your father has been diverting funds from Mercer Tech for 2 years. The records are in the backup server that you thought was wiped after the system upgrade last spring. The password is your mother's maiden name and her birth year. If you check, you will find transfers to shell companies in Singapore, the Caymans, and Luxembourg. $47 million so far. He is planning to finalize control transfer within 2 months, probably tied to paperwork you will sign during your honeymoon." Julian's face went completely still. The anger drained away, replaced by something colder and more dangerous. "What did you say?" "You heard me." "Who are you?" "Someone your mother hired before she died. She knew something was wrong. She tried to tell you, but you did not listen." Fiona adjusted her bag on her shoulder. "Check the server. If I am lying, you lose nothing. If I am telling the truth, you lose everything by doing nothing." She walked past him, through the kitchen, and out the service entrance into the cold night air. Her car was parked 2 blocks away, standard protocol for maintaining separation between her real identity and her cover. She made it halfway to the vehicle before she heard footsteps behind her. "Stop!" She turned. Julian had followed her, his expensive shoes completely inappropriate for the cracked sidewalk. He looked out of place here, away from the marble and crystal. his breath misting in the February chill. "You do not walk away after saying something like that," he said. "You do not accuse someone's father of fraud and then just leave. I was fired. You told me to leave. I am telling you to explain. Right now." Fiona studied him. His hands were clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. But underneath the anger was something else. Uncertainty. The smallest seed of doubt. "Not here," she said. "If your father realizes I am still talking to you, this gets much more complicated. My father is hosting 200 guests. He will not notice. Richard Sutton will notice. He is very good at noticing things. That is why your father chose him as a partner." She unlocked her car. "There is a diner 3 miles north on Clearview. Meet me there in 20 minutes. Come alone. I am not going anywhere until you tell me who you are." Fiona opened her car door, then paused. "My name is Fiona Grant. I am a forensic accountant specializing in corporate fraud. Your mother's attorney hired me 6 months before she died, with instructions to investigate if she passed away, before resolving her concerns about irregularities in Mercer Tech's finances. She left a sealed letter with her lawyer describing what she suspected. I have been working undercover in your house for 3 months gathering evidence, and yes, I can prove all of this. 20 minutes. Clearview Diner. If you do not show up, I will submit my findings to federal authorities, and you can learn about your father's crimes when the FBI raids your office." She got in the car and drove away, watching in the rearview mirror as Julian stood on the sidewalk, his entire world suddenly uncertain. The diner was nearly empty at this hour. Fiona sat in a back booth, her laptop open but angled so no one could see the screen. She had ordered coffee she did not plan to drink and watched the door. Julian arrived in exactly 19 minutes, still wearing his suit, looking entirely out of place among the worn vinyl seats and fluorescent lighting. He slid into the booth across from her without greeting. "Show me your proof." Fiona turned the laptop toward him. On the screen was a scanned document, yellowed slightly with age, bearing his mother's handwriting. Eleanor Mercer's signature was at the bottom, notarized and dated 14 months ago. "To whom it may concern," Julian read aloud, his voice strained. "I am writing this in sound mind, though my body fails me. I have discovered financial irregularities within Mercer Tech that suggest systematic diversion of company assets. My husband Patrick dismisses my concerns. My son Julian is too focused on expansion to notice the patterns I see. If I die before resolving this, I have arranged for professional investigation. The investigator will have full access to all documents and records I have secretly copied. I do this not out of malice, but out of love for the company I helped build, and the son I hope will lead it with integrity. Eleanor Mercer." He looked up, his face pale. This could be forged. It could be. But it is not. Fiona pulled up another file. "This is the retainer agreement between your mother's attorney, David Whitmore, and my firm. It is dated 2 weeks after that letter. Here is the death certificate showing she passed away 7 months later. Here is the letter of instruction Mr. Whitmore gave me when I took the case, along with encrypted files your mother had been compiling before she became too ill to continue." Julian stared at the screen, his jaw working. "My mother was confused toward the end. The medication made her paranoid. She was paranoid because your father convinced you she was paranoid. It is a remarkably effective strategy." Fiona closed the laptop. She started noticing discrepancies 18 months before she died. Small things at first. Approved expenditures that never appeared in quarterly reports. Consulting fees paid to companies that did not seem to exist. She began quietly copying files, taking photographs of documents when Patrick was away. She knew something was wrong but could not prove it alone, and she knew no one would believe her without proof. "So she hired you. She hired my firm. I was assigned to the case after her death, when the investigation was activated per her instructions." Julian leaned back against the vinyl, his eyes closed. 3 months. You have been in my house for 3 months. Yes. Cleaning my floors, serving my meals, lying to my face every single day. I was doing my job. Your mother paid me to uncover the truth. That is what I have been doing. His eyes opened, sharp and angry. "And what truth have you uncovered? You mentioned numbers. Shell companies. Give me specifics." Fiona pulled a folder from her bag and set it on the table. Your father has been running a layered system. The primary mechanism is false consulting contracts with companies that exist only on paper. Mercer Tech pays these entities for services never rendered. The money is then transferred through a series of shell corporations, each in a different jurisdiction, before being consolidated into accounts your father controls. So over 24 months, he has diverted $47 million. Julian opened the folder. Inside were printed spreadsheets, highlighted transaction records, corporate registration documents. His hands shook slightly as he turned the pages. But it is more sophisticated than simple theft, Fiona continued. Your father has been using the diverted funds to make investments in his own name. Some of those investments are then sold back to Mercer Tech at inflated prices, creating a secondary revenue stream. He is not just stealing from the company. He is using company money to build personal assets, then forcing the company to buy those assets at a markup. It is elegant, really. Vicious, but elegant. Richard Sutton is involved. It was not a question. Sutton manages several of the shell entities. He also sits on the board of 2 companies that have recently entered into contracts with Mercer Tech. Contracts that are profitable for those companies but questionable for yours. He and your father have been partners in this for at least 18 months, possibly longer. Julian set down the papers. And Veronica? Fiona had been waiting for that question. I started investigating her 2 weeks ago, when I noticed she was unusually insistent about scheduling your wedding during the same period when several major contracts are up for renewal. Her background is strange. She appeared in your life very suddenly. Her previous relationships are difficult to verify, and her financial history has gaps. You investigated my fiancé. I investigated everyone close to you. That is my job. Fiona opened another file on her laptop. Veronica Chase is not her real name. She was born Vanessa Castellano. She has a history of relationships with wealthy men, relationships that coincide with financial transactions those men later regretted. She has never been charged with anything, but the pattern is clear. 3 years ago, she was briefly engaged to a venture capitalist in Boston. That engagement ended when he discovered she had been feeding information about his portfolio to competitors. 2 years before that, she dated a real estate developer in Miami, who later realized she had been steering his property acquisitions toward a group that turned out to include her brother. Julian said nothing. His face had gone from pale to grey. 6 months before she met you, she had dinner with Richard Sutton, 3 times. I have credit card receipts and restaurant surveillance footage. She was placed in your life deliberately, Julian. She is part of the operation. You do not know that. Dinner does not mean conspiracy. No, but the timing does. She entered your life exactly 2 weeks after your mother died, exactly when you were grieving and vulnerable, exactly when your father needed to ensure you stayed distracted while the infrastructure for this fraud was finalized. And she has been pushing you toward marriage ever since, specifically marriage followed by an extended honeymoon, during which you will be asked to sign documents transferring administrative control of certain company functions. Julian stood abruptly. I need air. Fiona watched as he walked outside into the parking lot. Through the diner window, she could see him pacing, his hands in his hair. She understood the feeling. Learning that the people you trusted most were manipulating you, that your entire reality was built on lies, that was not information anyone could process calmly. She gave him 5 minutes before following him outside. He was leaning against his car, staring at nothing. I know this is difficult, she said. Difficult. He laughed, the sound bitter. My father is a thief. My fiancée is a con artist. My mother died trying to warn me, and I told her she was confused. Difficult does not begin to cover it. Your mother knew you would believe her eventually. That is why she hired me. She knew you needed proof. What happens now? That depends on what you want to happen. I have evidence, but not everything I need for a federal case that guarantees conviction. I need access to the primary server, the one in your office that handles all corporate transactions. The backup server has the historical data, but to prove the fraud is ongoing, I need current transaction logs. I need to show pattern and intent. Julian looked at her. You want to continue the investigation. I want to finish it. I want to build a case so solid that your father and everyone involved goes to prison, but I cannot do that without your cooperation." "What kind of cooperation?" "I need to go back into your house, not as fired help, but as someone you trust. Publicly, you need to pretend everything is normal. You need to act like nothing happened tonight. Meanwhile, you give me access to the files I need. We work together, quietly, and we build the case properly. You want me to lie to my father. I want you to protect yourself and your company. If you confront your father now with partial evidence, he will destroy what remains and disappear. Sutton will cover his tracks. Veronica will vanish. You will be left with suspicions and no justice. But if we are careful, if we do this correctly, we can recover the stolen assets and ensure everyone involved faces consequences." Julian was quiet for a long time. A truck passed on the highway, its headlights briefly illuminating them both before darkness returned. "How do I know I can trust you?" he finally asked.
Shipment is compromised.
"You do not, but your mother did. And right now, I am the only person telling you the truth." He nodded slowly. "What is the plan? Tomorrow morning, you call me. You apologize for overreacting at the gala. You explain that you were stressed and took it out on me unfairly. You offer me my job back, maybe even a small raise as apology. I accept. I return to the house as if nothing happened. My father will be suspicious. Let him be suspicious. Suspicious is not the same as certain. You tell him you felt guilty for embarrassing a staff member publicly, that it reflects poorly on you as an employer. He will accept that because it makes you look soft, which is how he already sees you." Julian flinched but did not argue. "Once I am back in the house, we set up a secure way to communicate. Nothing digital that can be traced. We need to assume your devices are monitored. You think my father is spying on me? I think Richard Sutton is, and I think Veronica definitely is. She has access to your home, your office, your computer. If I were running this operation, I would have surveillance on every device you use." Julian rubbed his face. "This is insane. This is $47 million and counting. People have done worse for less." They stood in the parking lot as the night grew colder. Finally, Julian straightened. "I will call you tomorrow at 9. Be ready to act surprised when I apologize." "I will. And Fiona?" He met her eyes. "If you are lying to me, if this is some scheme you are running, I will destroy you." "Noted." He drove away, his taillights disappearing into the darkness. Fiona returned to her car and sat for a moment, letting the adrenaline fade. The investigation had just entered its most dangerous phase. Now she was not just observing. She was actively working with someone inside the situation, someone emotionally compromised and potentially unpredictable. But it was also progress. For 3 months she had worked alone, piecing together fragments. Now she had an ally, someone with legitimate access to every system she needed. If they were careful, if Julian could maintain composure under pressure, they might actually pull this off. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Julian. New phone. Bought it cash at a convenience store. Use this number only." She saved the contact and replied, "Smart. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start." She drove back to her apartment, the real one across town that no one at the Mercer estate knew about. Inside, she uploaded the evening's documentation to encrypted cloud storage. Then she sat at her desk and pulled out the photograph she kept in her drawer. Her father smiled up at her from the picture, his arm around her younger self. It had been taken 2 weeks before the company he worked for collapsed, before they discovered the executives had been running a Ponzi scheme for years. Her father lost everything. His pension, his savings, his reputation. He died 3 years later, the stress having taken its final toll. That was why she did this work. Not for money, though she was paid well. Not for excitement, though it certainly provided that. She did it because she knew what fraud looked like from the victim's side. She knew what it meant to watch your parent destroyed by someone else's greed. Eleanor Mercer had tried to protect her son. Fiona would make sure that effort was not wasted. Julian called at exactly 9 in the morning. Fiona answered on the 3rd ring, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "This is Fiona Grant." "Miss Grant, this is Julian Mercer. I owe you an apology." His tone was formal, precisely what it needed to be if someone was listening. "I overreacted last night. My behavior was unprofessional and unfair. I would like to offer you your position back, with a 10% raise as compensation for my rudeness. That is very kind of you, Mr. Mercer. I appreciate the apology. Can you return to work tomorrow morning? Yes. Thank you for the opportunity. The call ended. Simple, believable, exactly what a guilt-ridden employer might do. Fiona spent the rest of the day preparing. She created a new encrypted communication system, tested it 3 times, and memorized the protocols. By the time she arrived at the Mercer estate the next morning, she looked exactly like someone grateful for a second chance. The other staff members gave her curious looks, but said nothing. Patrick Mercer was having breakfast on the terrace when she arrived. He watched her walk past with an expression that was difficult to read, not quite suspicious, but certainly evaluating. Julian was in his office. She knocked softly before entering with fresh coffee. "Leave it on the desk," he said without looking up, his voice carrying the disinterest of someone addressing hired help. She set down the tray. Underneath the saucer was a folded piece of paper, placed so only he could see it. He palmed it smoothly while reaching for the cup, never breaking his focus on the computer screen. Anyone watching would have seen nothing unusual. The note contained instructions for their first secure communication that evening. Working alongside Julian was stranger than working alone. For 3 months, Fiona had moved through the house as invisible staff, collecting information in solitude. Now she had a partner, someone who could access systems she could only observe from a distance. But partnership required trust, and trust was complicated when the person you were trusting had just discovered his entire family was built on lies. Julian proved surprisingly disciplined. He maintained his normal schedule, attended meetings, had lunch with Veronica. He showed no signs of the turmoil Fiona knew he must be feeling. She wondered if that composure was real, or if he was simply very good at pretending, a skill he might have inherited from his father. 3 days into their covert collaboration, they made their first major discovery. Julian had given Fiona access to his office late at night, claiming he needed files organized after a long day of meetings. What she actually did was copy transaction logs from his primary computer while he stood watch. The current data confirmed everything from the backup server and revealed something worse. The fraud was accelerating. In the past 6 weeks alone, Patrick had diverted an additional $8 million. The timeline was tightening faster than Fiona had anticipated. She brought the findings to Julian during one of their careful encounters, this time in the estate's library at 2 in the morning when the rest of the house slept. "He is moving faster," she said quietly, spreading printouts across the desk. "These transactions were not in the historical data. He is escalating." Julian studied the papers, his jaw tight. Because he knows something. He must suspect. Possibly, or he is simply approaching his endgame. The longer a fraud runs, the more risk accumulates. Experienced criminals know when to close the operation and disappear. "My father is not a criminal. He is a businessman who made bad choices." Fiona looked at him steadily. "Your father is a criminal who happens to run a business. The sooner you accept that, the clearer your thinking will be." Julian said nothing, but she saw the acceptance settle into his expression, reluctant and painful. "There is something else," Fiona continued. "I have been tracking Veronica's movements. 2 days ago, she had coffee with Richard Sutton. Yesterday, she visited a law office downtown that specializes in prenuptial agreements and trust law. We already have a prenup. She insisted on one." "I know, I read it. It is surprisingly generous to her considering she has no assets. But this office handles a different kind of law. They structure agreements that protect assets during criminal investigations, that create legal barriers between spouses when one faces prosecution." The implication hung between them. Veronica was preparing for fallout. "She knows we are investigating," Julian said. "Or she knows the operation is ending soon and wants to protect herself when it collapses. Either way, it means our timeline just shortened considerably." Julian stood and walked to the window overlooking the gardens. Dawn was still hours away, the grounds dark except for landscape lighting that cast long shadows across the lawn. "I need to ask you something," he said without turning. "When my mother was dying, when she was trying to tell me about the fraud, I dismissed her. I told her the medication was making her confused. I was patient and kind, but I did not believe her. Do you think she knew that I did not believe her?" Fiona considered lying, offering comfort. But he had asked for truth. Yes, I think she knew. He nodded slowly. That is what I thought. She also knew you would believe her eventually. That is why she planned for this. She understood you needed proof, that suspicion was not sufficient. She did not blame you for needing evidence before accepting something so terrible about your father. How do you know that? Because she wrote it in her instructions to me. She specifically said that you were trained to think critically, to require verification before acting, and that this quality made you an excellent CEO but would make you initially resistant to allegations against your father. She knew you, Julian. She knew exactly how you would react, and she planned accordingly. He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke again, his voice was steadier. What do we need to finish this? I need complete access to the main server, not just your office computer, but the corporate system. I need to trace every transaction in real time, build a chronological record that shows intent and pattern, and I need to connect Sutton directly to the money. Right now, I can prove your father is stealing. I can show Sutton is involved. But to guarantee everyone goes down, I need to demonstrate they were partners from the beginning, that this was conspiracy, not one person acting alone. The corporate server requires executive-level clearance. I can get you in, but it will take time to arrange access that does not raise questions. How much time? A week, maybe less. We may not have a week. If your father is accelerating the fraud, he might be preparing to execute his final move. Once that happens, once he has control, evidence will disappear fast. Julian turned from the window. Then we work faster. What else do you need? Over the next several days, they fell into a rhythm. Julian maintained his public persona while quietly granting Fiona access to systems and files. She worked late into each night, building the case document by document. They communicated through dead drops, notes left in books in the library, messages hidden in file names on shared drives that looked like ordinary business documents. Veronica grew more insistent about wedding plans. She brought home venue brochures, talked constantly about honeymoon destinations, pushed Julian to finalize dates. He deflected with work obligations, promised they would discuss it soon, bought himself time he desperately needed. Patrick watched it all with the benevolent smile of a father pleased to see his son settling down. But Fiona caught him studying Julian sometimes, his expression calculating. He suspected something, even if he could not identify what. The break came on the 8th day. Julian had finally arranged for Fiona to access the main corporate server under the guise of a comprehensive security audit he had ordered. She spent an entire night in the server room, copying transaction logs, tracing connections, building the final pieces of evidence. What she found was worse than anything they had anticipated. The fraud was not just Patrick and Sutton. There were 6 other conspirators, all investors or board members, all taking cuts of the diverted funds. The operation had been running for 3 years, not 2, and the final move was scheduled for 2 weeks from now, timed precisely with a major merger Julian had been negotiating. The paperwork would transfer operational control of Mercer Tech to a newly formed entity that Patrick and his partners controlled. Julian would remain CEO in name but would have no actual power. She compiled everything into a single encrypted file and brought it to Julian the next morning, catching him alone in the garage before he left for the office. "It is bigger than we thought," she said, handing him a flash drive. "Much bigger. This is everyone involved, every transaction, every connection. It is complete." Julian plugged the drive into his laptop, his expression darkening as he scrolled through the data. 3 years. He has been doing this since before my mother got sick. She probably started noticing it precisely because the scale was growing. Small frauds are easy to hide. Once it reaches a certain size, patterns become visible. 6 board members, people I trusted, people I defended. People who saw an opportunity and took it. Julian closed the laptop. "We go to the authorities today." "Not yet." "Why not?" "We have everything. We have evidence of the past. We need evidence of the future. The conspiracy charge is stronger if we can show they were actively planning to execute the final phase. Right now, their lawyers could argue it was a series of bad decisions, not organized crime. If we wait until they start the merger process, if we catch them in the act, the case becomes inescapable. 2 more weeks of pretending everything is fine. 2 more weeks of having dinner with my father, of smiling at Veronica, of shaking hands with board members who are robbing me blind. 2 more weeks that guarantee convictions instead of plea deals. Julian stared through the windshield at the house he had grown up in, the home that had once felt safe and was now just another crime scene. Fine, 2 weeks. But Fiona, if something goes wrong, if they realize what we are doing and move against us, I need to know you have a backup plan. I always have a backup plan. That night, everything changed. Fiona was in her small room organizing files when she heard shouting from downstairs. She moved quietly to the hallway, staying in the shadows. Julian's voice carried up the stairs, angry and loud. I am not signing anything until I review it with my own lawyers. Patrick's response was calmer but edged with steel. This is a formality, Julian. We have been over this deal a dozen times. Then one more review will not hurt. Your hesitation is becoming a problem. Sutton and the others are asking questions. They need assurance that you are committed. I am committed to doing what is best for this company. That includes proper due diligence. Silence stretched. Then Patrick spoke again, his voice softer but somehow more menacing. Your mother would be disappointed to see you being so suspicious. She always said you had her sharp mind but my trusting heart. Apparently, she was wrong. The mention of Eleanor was a calculated blow. Fiona heard Julian's sharp intake of breath from where she stood. Do not talk about my mother. Why not? She built this company as much as I did. She would want you to trust family, to honor what we built together. She would want me to protect what she built. That is exactly what I am doing. Footsteps approached. Fiona retreated into her room as Patrick climbed the stairs. He paused outside her door, and for a terrible moment she thought he might knock. But he continued down the hall to his own room, and she released the breath she had been holding. Her phone buzzed. Julian's text was brief. He knows something is wrong. Be careful. She replied, we hold the course. 2 more weeks. But as she lay in bed that night listening to the old house settle around her, Fiona knew the situation was deteriorating. Patrick was pushing harder. Veronica was watching Julian more closely. The conspirators were getting nervous, and nervous criminals were dangerous. 14 days until they could move openly. 14 days of maintaining the lie while surrounded by people who would destroy them both if they discovered the truth. Fiona had worked risky cases before. She had posed as employees, colleagues, even romantic partners to catch white-collar criminals. But she had never felt the walls closing in quite like this, had never been quite so aware that one wrong move would end, not just the investigation, but potentially their lives. She thought again of her father, of the trust he had placed in people who betrayed him. She thought of Julian Mercer, dying with secrets her son did not believe, and she thought of Julian trying to hold himself together while his entire world revealed itself as a carefully constructed lie. 2 weeks. They just needed to survive 2 more weeks. The attack came on the 10th night. Fiona was leaving the estate late, carrying her bag to the car she kept parked 2 blocks away. The street was dark, the nearest streetlight flickering intermittently. She was halfway to her vehicle when she heard footsteps behind her, too quick and too close. Training overrode panic. She spun as the first man reached for her, using his momentum to throw him off balance. He stumbled but recovered faster than she expected. There were 2 of them, both wearing dark clothes and ski masks, both moving with the efficiency of professionals. The second man grabbed for her bag. She held on, wrenching sideways, and felt something tear. Her bag flew open, spilling contents across the pavement. The tablet she had been carrying, the one containing copies of transaction records, skittered across concrete. The first man lunged for it. Fiona kicked hard, catching him in the knee. He went down with a grunt, but the second man had her arm now, twisting it behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulder. She drove her heel down on his instep, heard him curse, felt his grip loosen just slightly. It was sufficient. She wrenched free, stumbled, caught herself against a parked car. The men regrouped, moving to flank her. This was not random robbery. They were here for the data, which meant someone knew what she had been doing. She ran. Behind her, footsteps pounded pavement. She cut through an alley, emerged on a busier street where a few late-night pedestrians walked. The presence of witnesses slowed her pursuers, but did not stop them. They were committed now, past the point where witnesses mattered. Fiona's car was still a block away. She would never make it. Instead, she ducked into a 24-hour pharmacy, bright with fluorescent lights and security cameras. The clerk behind the counter looked up, startled by her breathless entrance. "Call the police," Fiona said. "2 men are following me. They attacked me." The clerk reached for the phone. Through the window, Fiona saw the 2 men saw them assess the situation. Cameras, witnesses, a clerk on the phone. They exchanged glances and disappeared into the darkness. The police came. Fiona gave a statement, described the attack as attempted robbery, said nothing about corporate espionage or fraud. The officers were sympathetic but unsurprised. This neighborhood had seen an increase in muggings recently, they said. She was lucky to escape with just bruises. They offered to drive her home. She declined and called a rideshare instead, giving an address 3 blocks from her real apartment. Only when she was safely inside her own space, door locked and chain engaged, did she allow herself to shake. The tablet was gone. A month of documentation, lost. But she had learned long ago to maintain backups, to never trust a single copy of critical data. Everything on that tablet existed in encrypted cloud storage, accessible from any device. The attackers had gained nothing except confirmation that she was worth attacking. She texted Julian from her secure phone. "Compromised, they know, need to meet." His response came within minutes. Same place, 1 hour. The diner was busier at this hour, the late-night crowd of truckers and insomniacs filling booths. Julian looked like he had not slept. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually immaculate appearance was disheveled. "Are you hurt?" he asked as soon as she sat down. "Bruised, nothing serious. They took my tablet, but I have backups. My father sent them. He must have. Possibly. Or Sutton. Or Veronica. Any of them could have arranged it once they suspected I was more than hired help." Julian rubbed his face. "This is escalating too fast. We should go to the authorities now, tonight, before someone gets seriously hurt. If we go now with incomplete evidence, they scatter. Your father has resources, connections, probably exit strategies already in place. We bring him down properly or not at all. What if they try again? What if next time they are not interested in just stealing data?" Fiona had been considering that question since the attack. "We change tactics. I cannot go back to the house. That cover is burned. But you can still access what we need. You have legitimate reasons to be in every system, every room. You finish the documentation while I coordinate with federal authorities to prepare for when we have everything. You want me to do this alone. I want you to do what your mother trusted you to do. Protect the company, expose the truth. You have the access and the standing. I am just the investigator. But you are the CEO. Your testimony carries weight that mine never could." Julian was quiet, working through the logic. "How long until the merger documents are finalized?" 4 days. Once they present them for your signature, we move. We have federal agents standing by. We have evidence of conspiracy and active fraud. And we have you refusing to sign while simultaneously exposing the entire operation. 4 days of pretending I do not know my father tried to have you attacked. 4 days of having dinner with Veronica, while knowing she is feeding information to Sutton. 4 days of smiling at board members who are robbing me. 4 days that end with justice. Real justice. Not the kind where rich men buy their way out of consequences. He met her eyes across the table. You have personal investment in this. This is not just about my mother for you. No, it is not. Fiona did not elaborate. He did not ask. They parted outside the diner, returning separately to their respective spaces. Fiona spent the rest of the night documenting the attack, adding it to the case file. Assault in furtherance of fraud. Another charge, another piece of evidence showing how far the conspiracy had gone. Over the next 4 days, Julian became someone she barely recognized. He played his role perfectly, the dutiful son and fiancé, the engaged CEO preparing for a major merger. He had dinner with Patrick and laughed at his father's jokes. He attended a charity gala with Veronica and posed for photographs. He shook hands with board members and discussed quarterly projections. And every night he sent Fiona updates through their secure channel. Documents copied, conversations recorded, evidence accumulating. On the third day, Veronica tried her final play. Julian texted, "Emergency. She has photos." They met in a parking garage downtown. Julian's car pulled into a darkened corner away from cameras. "She says she has compromising photographs of me," he said without preamble. "Pictures that suggest infidelity, financial impropriety, things that would destroy my reputation. She says if I do not sign the merger documents and proceed with the wedding, she releases them to every media outlet in the country." "Let me see them." He showed her his phone. The photographs were sophisticated, showing Julian in what appeared to be compromising situations with various women, in locations that suggested hotels and private meetings. The images were convincing at first glance. Fiona studied them carefully. They are fake. Well-made fakes, but still fabricated. "See here, the lighting angle is wrong for the room. And here, the shadow does not match the body position. These are composites, probably made using AI generation tools. Give me 24 hours and I can prove they are false." "Will anyone care that they are false? The damage happens the moment they are published. Truth comes later, after my reputation is destroyed." Which is exactly what she is counting on. But Veronica made a mistake. Blackmail is a crime. The moment she threatened you with false evidence, she gave us another charge to add to the list. Julian looked at her. "You want me to let her think it worked? I want you to tell her you need time to think. You are upset, you are scared, you need to process. That buys us the final day we need. Tomorrow the merger documents are presented. Tomorrow we move. And if she releases the photos anyway, then we release the proof they are fake along with evidence of her blackmail, her real identity, and her connection to Sutton and your father. She goes down with everyone else." Julian nodded slowly. "Tomorrow. All of this ends tomorrow. All of it." He drove away into the night. Fiona watched him go, then pulled out her own phone and made a call to the federal prosecutor who had been waiting on standby for weeks. "We move tomorrow," she said. "Have your team ready." The final day arrived cold and clear. Fiona was not at the estate, but she tracked everything through Julian's messages. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. Patrick had called it specifically to present the merger documents for final signature. All the key conspirators would be present, all except Veronica, who had mysteriously left town that morning. Her absence was noted, but not investigated. She would be found later, arrested separately, but for now, the focus was on the board meeting. Julian sent his final message at 1:45. "Going in. If this goes wrong, thank you for trying." Fiona sat in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the Mercer Tech headquarters, her laptop open to encrypted feeds that would show her when federal agents moved in. She had done everything she could. The evidence was complete, the authorities were briefed, and Julian knew exactly what to say and when to say it. Now it came down to whether he could hold his composure while surrounded by people who had betrayed him, whether he could look his father in the eye and destroy him. At 2:07 her phone buzzed. Julian's text contained a single word: now. Federal agents entered Mercer Tech headquarters. Simultaneously, teams moved on Sutton's office, on the homes of the board members involved, on the locations where shell company paperwork was stored. It was coordinated and comprehensive, the result of weeks of preparation. Patrick Mercer was arrested in the boardroom, still holding the merger documents he had been presenting. The shock on his face, Julian reported later, was genuine. He had not believed until that moment that his son would actually betray him, but Julian had not betrayed his father. He had stopped a criminal. There was a difference, one that Patrick would have years in prison to contemplate. 3 months after the arrests, Julian stood in the boardroom where his father had been taken away in handcuffs. The space looked different now, cleaner somehow despite being physically unchanged. New board members occupied the chairs where conspirators once sat. The company had survived barely, but it had survived. Mercer Tech's stock had plummeted initially when news of the fraud broke. Investors panicked, clients questioned contracts, competitors circled like sharks. Julian spent weeks doing interviews, presenting evidence that he had been victim rather than accomplice, demonstrating the new oversight systems being implemented. Slowly, painfully, trust began to rebuild. The recovered funds helped. Federal investigators had traced 43 million of the 47 million stolen. Some had been spent, lost to Patrick's investments and the conspirators' personal expenses, but the bulk was returned to company accounts. It was not complete restitution, but it was something. Fiona had testified in the preliminary hearings, her forensic accounting expertise providing the foundation for prosecution. Patrick's lawyers tried to discredit her, suggesting she had fabricated evidence or exceeded her investigative authority. The judge was not convinced. The evidence was too thorough, too well documented, supported by Julian's testimony and the digital trails that could not be erased. Patrick was awaiting trial, his bail denied due to flight risk. 3 board members had taken plea agreements in exchange for testimony. Sutton was fighting the charges, confident his lawyers could find some technicality. Veronica had been arrested in Montreal using a fake passport. Extradition was pending. Julian had visited his father once in jail. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. Patrick had tried to justify himself, to explain how he had built the company and deserved compensation, how Julian should understand family loyalty. Julian had listened in silence, then stood and walked out. He never returned. The company required complete restructuring. Julian brought in external auditors, replaced the entire finance department, implemented transparency protocols that made every major transaction visible to multiple oversight bodies. It was expensive and time-consuming, but it was necessary. Mercer Tech would never again be vulnerable to internal fraud. Fiona had prepared to leave once her testimony was complete. Her job was done, the case was solid, and she had other clients waiting. But Julian had made an offer she found difficult to refuse: Director of Corporate Compliance, a permanent position with full authority to investigate any aspect of company operations, answerable only to the board and with guaranteed protection from retaliation. The salary was substantial, but that was not what made her consider it. She sat in her apartment the night Julian made the offer, looking at the photograph of her father. He had never gotten justice. The executives who destroyed his company had settled out of court, paid fines that were fractions of what they had stolen, and moved on to other opportunities. Her father had died knowing his destroyers faced no real consequences. But Eleanor Mercer had gotten justice. Patrick would spend years in prison. The company she helped build would continue under her son's leadership, protected by systems designed to prevent fraud. The people who betrayed her would face real punishment. Fiona called Julian the next morning. "I accept the position, but I have conditions." "Name them." "I want a fund established to compensate employees who lost money in their retirement accounts due to the stock decline. I want scholarships created for children of whistleblowers who expose corporate fraud. And I want regular audits published publicly, so everyone knows what this company is doing financially." Julian was quiet for a moment. "Those conditions will cost millions. They will cost less than another fraud would." "Agreed, all of it. When can you start?" She started the following Monday. The other employees were cautious around her initially, uncertain how to treat someone who had posed as domestic staff before exposing massive corruption. But competence earned respect, and within weeks she had established herself as someone genuinely committed to keeping the company honest. The mansion felt different when she returned to collect her final belongings from the staff quarters. It was being sold, Julian having decided he could not live in a place built on his father's lies. The new owner would be a non-profit organization working with domestic abuse survivors. Eleanor would have approved, Fiona thought. She found Julian in his mother's old study, surrounded by boxes of her personal effects, photographs, letters, journals. A lifetime of memories being sorted and preserved. "I found something you should see," he said, holding out a letter. The envelope was addressed to Fiona in Eleanor's handwriting. Julian had already opened it, but he handed it to her without comment. The letter was dated 2 weeks before Eleanor's death. Her handwriting was shaky but legible. "Dear Miss Grant, if you are reading this, then I have passed and my suspicions were confirmed. Thank you for taking this case. Thank you for protecting my son when I no longer could. I know this work is difficult and often thankless. I know you have your own reasons for choosing this path, your own losses that drive you. I hope that helping my family brings you some measure of peace. Julian is a good man, but he was raised to trust when he should have questioned. Teach him to see clearly. Teach him that integrity is not weakness. And please, help him understand that I never doubted him. I doubted my ability to make him believe me, which is different. With gratitude and hope, Eleanor Mercer. Fiona folded the letter carefully. She understood people very well. She understood you. She picked the right person for this. They stood in the study surrounded by Eleanor's life, two people brought together by fraud and grief, now tasked with building something honest from the wreckage. The prosecutor called this morning, Julian said. Patrick's lawyers are pushing for a plea deal. Reduced sentence in exchange for cooperating in related cases. Are you going to support it? No. He gets the full trial, the full sentence. He made his choices, and so did I. Fiona nodded. It was the right decision, the hard decision. Justice was not always comfortable. Over the following months, Mercer Tech transformed. The fraud case became a teaching example in business schools, a cautionary tale about oversight and accountability. Julian gave interviews about the importance of questioning authority, even family authority. The company's new transparency became a competitive advantage, attracting clients who valued ethical business practices. Fiona implemented the compensation fund, personally reviewing each case of employees who had lost retirement savings. The process was meticulous and fair, ensuring money went to those genuinely harmed. She also established the Whistleblower Scholarship Program, funding education for children whose parents had risked everything to expose corporate wrongdoing. It was named the Eleanor Mercer Integrity Scholarship. 6 months after the arrests, the trial began. Fiona testified for 2 days, walking the jury through transaction records and shell company structures, explaining how the conspiracy had operated and how she had uncovered it. Patrick's lawyers tried to shake her testimony, but failed. The evidence was overwhelming. Julian testified as well, describing how his father had manipulated him, how Veronica had been placed in his life strategically, how the merger documents would have transferred control of his own company away from him. His testimony was calm and factual, devastating in its clarity. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Patrick Mercer was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. He would be 78 when released if he lived that long. The other conspirators received similar sentences. Sutton got 20 years. The board members who cooperated received reduced sentences but still faced prison time. Veronica was tried separately. The evidence of her involvement was circumstantial enough that her lawyers negotiated a plea deal. 7 years for conspiracy and fraud. She would serve 5 with good behavior, then disappear into whatever life came next for failed con artists. The mansion sold for substantially less than its market value, the fraud having tainted even the property. But the non-profit that purchased it transformed it into something valuable, a safe space for people escaping dangerous situations. Eleanor's study became an office for counselors. Patrick's boardroom became a classroom for job training. Julian moved into a modest apartment downtown, closer to the office, deliberately choosing simplicity over ostentation. He dated occasionally, but never seriously. Trust, once broken so completely, was difficult to rebuild. Fiona found herself settling into a life she had never anticipated. She had always moved between cases, never staying anywhere long enough to feel permanent. But Mercer Tech became something different. Not just a job, but a mission. Every audit she conducted, every system she implemented, was insurance against future fraud. She was building the kind of protection her father never had. One evening, nearly a year after the initial arrests, she and Julian had dinner at a restaurant neither of them would have chosen before everything happened. Not expensive, not fashionable, just honest food in a quiet space. "I got a letter from my father," Julian said. "First one since the trial. Are you going to read it?" "I already did. He still thinks he was justified. He still believes he deserved that money because he built the company. He thinks I betrayed him by choosing outsiders over family." "What did you write back?" "Nothing. There is nothing to say. He will never understand that stealing is wrong regardless of who does it or why. Some people are incapable of that kind of self-reflection." Fiona thought of her own father, of the executives who destroyed him without remorse. Some people construct entire moral frameworks to justify their behavior. It is easier than admitting they are simply thieves. "Do you think your father would be proud of what you do now?" It was a question she had asked herself many times. I think he would be relieved that someone is doing it, that someone is making sure the next family does not lose everything the way we did. They finished dinner and walked outside into the cool evening. The city moved around them, thousands of people conducting business and making deals and trusting that systems functioned honestly. Most of that trust was well placed, but some of it was not, and that was why people like Fiona existed. "The company is stable now," Julian said. "Really stable. The new systems are working. We might actually come out of this stronger. Your mother would be pleased. She would be pleased you finished what she started. I just implemented what you discovered. You did more than implement. You chose truth over family, evidence over loyalty. That is not easy, especially when the evidence destroys everything you believed about the people you loved." Julian looked up at the building that housed Mercer Tech, its windows lit against the darkening sky. "I used to think loyalty meant supporting people no matter what they did. But real loyalty is supporting what is right, even when the people you love are wrong. That is what my mother tried to teach me. It took me too long to learn it." They parted ways outside the restaurant, each heading to separate homes, separate lives that had intersected because of fraud and would remain connected through their shared commitment to preventing it. Fiona drove past her old apartment, the one she had maintained during the investigation. She had given it up months ago, no longer needing the separation between her real life and her cover. Now she lived in a place that felt permanent, filled with her actual belongings, decorated according to her own tastes. On her desk at home, she kept 2 photographs, one of her father, smiling before his world collapsed, and one of Eleanor Mercer, taken from the collection Julian had given her, showing a woman who had tried to protect what she loved and had succeeded, even if she did not live to see it. The Mercer Tech fraud case closed officially that month. All conspirators sentenced, all appeals denied, all recovered funds distributed. The company published its first fully transparent annual report, every transaction documented and verified by external auditors. Investors responded positively. Clients renewed contracts. Employees felt secure in their jobs. And in a small office on the 14th floor, Fiona Grant reviewed the next quarter's financial reports, searching for patterns that should not exist, protecting a company that had learned its lesson the hardest way possible. She would continue this work until she retired, until she was certain the systems she built were strong enough to outlast her. It was not glamorous work. It was not dramatic or exciting most days. But it was necessary, and it honored both her father's memory and Eleanor's trust. Some fights were won with evidence and persistence rather than action and confrontation. This had been one of those fights, and for once, the good people had won.